Welcome, everyone. So happy to have you back again this week. This week, we're talking about chapters 10 and 11. So chapter 10, designing for fact fluency, and 11 with number strings. So just once again, just a couple of reminders and just housekeeping things. First off is zero judgment zone, right? Above all else, we want to be kind. And so whenever we are working and talking together, just making sure we're keeping that as a top priority. And just another plug for my show, Ted Lasso, that I just love. We got to be curious. And I did change the agenda. I made one more meeting for us because last week we had such a great conversation with two chapters. We couldn't get to the third one. So we bumped fluency to tonight. And so I did add Monday, August 19th. I know some of you are back to school at that point, but I figured, two chapters next week, and then the August 7th, and then the two chapters will wrap us up for the book study. So I did change the schedule. So on the Padlet, when you have the link to that schedule, I did update that for us. I would love you to rename yourselves with your name. Your just first name is even fine. The role that you have, grade levels you're working with, and your pronouns. Just about so that we get into our small groups, you can have those kind of things already known about each other, so we can get to the good, rich discussion tonight. And of course, it's never too late to join in. We are welcome for anyone at any time. So share that link to sign up to get the emails about our meetings. So we're going to be doing the same structure we've been doing the last few weeks, where I'm going to get you into breakout rooms. We'll talk in the small groups. I would love it if one person in the group would take notes on that Google interactive file. Then I'll bring you back out. We'll have a whole group discussion, and that part, remember, is recorded. And then we'll go back in the small group for chapter 11, come back out and have the whole group. I would again love it if you happen to be randomly put in breakout groups 1 to 4. If you would be prepared when we come back out to say something to get our conversation started. And then after the chapter 11 that we read, groups 5 and up, if you could just be prepared to say something and get our conversation going, that would be really awesome. There was one particular passage that just, I had to like write it down. I have to be, I'll get that, Karina, in a second. These three things will like hit to the heart for me. If I've got to remember this, so I can rattle this off when I'm presenting and working with teachers. So the first of all, that math fact fluency, we need to make sure that math fact fluency does not interrupt the grade level instruction. Too often I'm seeing that in my consulting work, right? That kids are being put into an intervention, and I get hired even to work with interventionists, and they'll tell me, well, it's okay, I haven't taught math before, because all they want me to do is the math facts when the half an hour that I have the kids. And I just say, here we go. Here we go. We have a journey to go on, right? So the fact that our students should be getting grade level content no matter what, and support in that journey. And that the idea that memorization as that singular goal can discriminate against our neurodiverse students who might have a particular difficulty in that, rather than that reconstruction of the math facts, right? Those number reasoning strategies, number relationships. And finally, which is a huge piece of the puzzle that I see everywhere I go around the country, memorization of math facts carries emotional weight for students. And I would say the adults that I meet, the Uber drivers that I meet, when I ask them their math story, they tell me why they hated math and weren't a math person. And I say, well, why? They tell me about those bulletin boards that were in third grade. Now, they're a 50-year-old driver of an Uber, but their third grade bulletin board, because their hot air balloon didn't go in the sky, their car didn't go around that racetrack, or, which I think is the most cruel, but probably the most proliferate, of ice cream scoops. That teachers somehow think that you get a new ice cream scoop or every topping for a new fact set that you learn. And at the end of the year, the kids get to eat the ice cream that they earned. So some kids are getting like one scoop of ice cream and no toppings, while others are getting a full sundae. Like, I mean, but teachers love it. Teachers still talk about that to this day. But yeah, so that emotional weight is a huge piece of the puzzle of helping us build identity in the agencies of all our kids. So I have put a slide of these in the interactive file. So I'm going to give you this link right now. This is the link to the interactive file. Remember, I put the sticky notes. If you weren't here last week, there were some suggestions, and Norma gave me a link to a way I can make the slide deck where I have sticky notes. So when you come down, so here's our interactive file. Remember, I have always the link for you at the top of this file of the Padlet of all the resources. I added more resources today from the fluency chapter and the problem strings chapter. So you have those for you as well. just as the structure of the small group, that whoever has taught the longest, if you wouldn't mind, you don't have to, it's a choice, but if you just help facilitate the discussion, make sure everyone is getting a chance to join in the discussion. And if you can think about someone could be a spokesperson. So when you come back out into the whole group, someone's willing to share what you talked about. We'll use the questions from the end of the chapters to guide your discussion right now. And I have also typed those again onto the slides here. So slide 4 are the questions for the fact fluency chapter. And the next slide is these 3 really hit to the heart of it for me, of the fact fluency, why we don't go down the route of memorization. And then finally, I have chapter 11 on the next slide, number 6. And then down below, I have 2 slides for each group. So you can see you have sticky notes you can just drag over, and I've labeled them group 1 for whatever breakout room you get put into. You'll go right into that room and begin discussing. Welcome back, everyone. That has never happened before. I closed the breakout rooms and not one person came out of that room for that full minute. So I know some really great discussions are happening in those rooms. So I would love to get a little bit of that recorded for those people who were not able to join in live tonight. So group 1, would you be able to share with us a little bit about what you talked about?
Sure. We were talking about the first question, which was about barriers that come up, and we talked about a couple of different barriers, and one is when children are, you mentioned it, Annalise, when children are publicly shamed because charts are put in public hallways about how well students are doing. So we talked quite a bit about that practice and where it comes from and who's responsible for that when that happens in a school, that there's a bunch of ice cream cones in a hallway. And I was in a school where they were ordered. They were like, I don't know how that happened, but they were rank ordered from who was doing the worst to who was doing the best. And there was a student with 0 scoops of ice cream in May. It was literally just an ice cream cone. So that was my story. That was pretty heartbreaking. And the other barrier we talked about is when schools require, right, that a teacher use a timed assessment, and they have a particular intervention program that requires that you start the kids at their 0s and then their 1s and then their 2s. And so if a teacher doesn't feel empowered to have full autonomy in their classroom, and then they are expected to do something that goes against what they know to be best for children, that's a barrier. There's hopefully always a way to work around that, but I know from experience that's really challenging sometimes for a teacher to navigate. So those were the things we talked about.
Thank you, Sue.
Yep.
Group 2?
I think I was in group 2. Molly, yes, so group 2. Okay. So we basically just talked about the impact of not knowing your facts and how a lot of times that limits children then from doing the math. Sometimes, yeah. Okay, Liz, right? Sometimes it kind of gets hung up on, we're not going to expose them and give them the more math and strategies until they know their facts, and we end up in this rut of just trying to get them to memorize. And Rachel's point about the neuroscience and the parts of the brain that memorize and the parts of the brain that think and reason, and those are 2 different parts, and where you have your strengths and weaknesses. I mean, we just cannot limit the math based on facts. We have to move beyond that and expose them. So we just talked a lot about in gaming and how important it is that our students aren't necessarily playing with numbers. They're not, and they're not getting that exposure to some of us who are a little bit older in our group, and some of the old time card games and things that just our parents don't know how to play, and we've kind of lost some of the playfulness of numbers, and we've gotten into the more of the memorization. So not moving children beyond memorizing facts is just a huge deficit.
When I was interviewing a student with a math running record, Dr. Nikki Newton's math running record, fact fluency interviews, and the teacher, when I came in, before the student came in, told me that the student was the lowest of the low. And I don't use terms like low and high to describe kids. But she has said that about him. And I was about to model it in front of other teachers. And the young man came in, and among the first ones we do were the 2s, 5s, and 10s. And so I asked him the 5s. I asked him 9 times 5. And he thought for a long time, and he finally said 45. And I said, well, what did your brain just do? How did you figure it out? He said, well, I halved that 9 to 4.5, and that times 10 is 45. Mm-hmm. I
Oh,
could not
that's
have made that.
awesome.
I could not have made that up, right? Like this student, and in that moment, I was like, what did he just do? Like he got the right answer, but he made the 9 a 4.5, and then that times 10. But I was actually a math coach at that point in classrooms, talking to students about double and halving, and how you can double one factor as long as you have the other, and reassociating that factor of a 2, right? That's what he was doing. But I was telling students, you can only do that strategy when you have even numbers. That's where I was on my learning journey. So this young man whose teacher had him for months in her classroom and thought he was the lowest of the low because he wasn't performing anything for her. I just wish I had this book to give to that teacher, because that young man for months was not given choice in how he made his thinking visible, or no one was even talking to him about his thinking. You cannot think he'd be lowest of the low, that he was not mathematically unbelievable, right? And there's no element of choice for him and helping him represent his thinking. And it just, yeah, it's one of my favorite stories. It just was crazy, crazy. Oh, group 3, anything you wanted to share?
I think our big thing that we were talking about was the fact how important strategies are, but also how much teachers don't have the knowledge yet. Like it's still being like, it's not something like when we talk about strategies, one of the things we need to mention is that teachers still call like an array a strategy, right? Whereas like that confusion between a strategy and a model is really important, because we want the kids to understand the strategies, how I think about a number, right? And how I can manipulate the number to be able to be more, to be easier to solve, right? And I think, I was a couple times where I have shared like a math problem or something like that, and a teacher goes, oh, I didn't think about that, and I think it's just, we don't have the time, like we're given all these things, but we're never really shown or able to play with the math, right? As teachers, we don't have time to sit there and play with math. We have our lesson for the day, and that's what we're going to do, and that's it. But I think the more that we build that capacity within teachers, the more they're going to recognize that child who halved and then multiplied by 10. But we don't know that that is something you can do. We're like, oh,
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. I find that a lot in my consulting work, is that it's about helping the teachers provide a safe space for the teachers to build their flexibility of thinking so they have choices, so then they can facilitate the journey of the kids. Because we can't facilitate a journey that we know nothing about, right? And very often teachers get put in a stressful situation because they're used to being the sage on the stage that has all the answers. So I'm going to ask students to share, in a number talk, what their strategy was, but I can't follow it. A lot of teachers kind of don't like that discomfort of, how do I know what this child was doing? So they kind of back away from that, as opposed to engaging in that learning. And we all learn together. And what were you doing? Can you make that visible for me? How could we make that visible so I know what you did, and make it accessible to other students as well? But I think and I know for myself, it's no fault of anyone. My undergraduate degree is sociology, my master's degree in order to teach. I'm certified K-8, but the only class they had me take was math and literature. So I'm certified in New Hampshire K-8, but no more at that point graduating, no point knowing how a kindergartner learned math than an 8th grader, right? There's so much expertise to it. So yeah, no, absolutely. And then group 4, anything else you wanted to add?
We also talked about the fact fluency not interfering with grade level instruction, and how important that was.
Yeah.
That Conceptual needs to happen simultaneous with procedural.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And how the memorization of the facts carries an emotional weight for a lot of students. Otherwise, I think
So
we
true.
talked about what everybody else has kind of shared already.
Super. Great. Well, thank
So
you.
we also talked about how the strategies can be taught as algorithms, which isn't great.
Mm-hmm.
And so now students are trying to memorize like 7 different strategies that have been taught in isolation, and it's not because teachers aren't trying, but it comes from that. They're seen as all separate lessons or all separate pieces and not connected. And then that adds another layer also for parents who are like, why in God's name is my child being forced to memorize like these couple of strategies, not seen as conceptual.
Mm-hmm. I do family math nights as well with districts. I think it's so important we encourage our parents and our families to get involved with math and the kids, and to encourage positive interactions between parents and kids. Because a lot of the parents have the phobia of math too. That there's traumatic stories of math that I hear all the time. But I would love it if their math homework were playing fact fluency games, like to get the practice. The parents can do that and not be freaking out because they don't know what an open number line is or an area model, but they can play fact fluency games as long as we share with the parents why we want them, how we want to do it, not just, regurgitating and memorize the facts. But when I do that, I usually do a problem string where I'll start with like 8 plus 5, and ask people to think about how we can make a 10, right? The fact fluency of how I can think additively and go beyond the counting. That's where a lot of our kids end up, is the counting. So move into additive reasoning of 8 plus 5, like to make that 8 a 10, which would be easier. That 2 that I need exists in that 5. I can break it apart and reassociate it. But then I do the same thing for 4/5 and 3/5, where 4/5 is a fifth away from a whole, and that 1/5 exists in the 3/5, and I can break apart it and the parents are like jaw dropping. What is this magic? And if I had learned this way when I was a kid, I wouldn't feel the way I do now about math. They get it, right? Then now they're our ally. And now we can be having them and their kids have positive interactions with math and help give practice to the kids as well, within the home environment. But yeah, such powerful stuff. I do want to mention to you that the Padlet that I have for you, I want to just remind everyone about the Padlet, that when you go to it, you have the beginning information about, purchasing the book and Rachel's webinar that she did for NCTM. It's a free one. You have to register for NCTM, but it's free. You don't need to pay for it. Are you seeing my Padlet right now? For some reason, I'm not. Okay, so it wasn't showing me the green. Hang on one second. Are you seeing it now? Thank you, Karina. I can see your face. Okay, and so I have the recordings of the previous sessions here as well, the notes and the schedule. But as you go over, you'll see I've created columns for each of the chapters. And so here we are in the chapter 10. There's my Padlet on fact fluency. So the math running record being a wonderful assessment to way to interview kids about their thinking with the basic facts for each of the operations. And they are free. And there are videos on that Padlet of me giving them, and so you can try it on your own and practice it. But I want to mention the game element as well, that Dr. Nikki and I were interviewed on a podcast for an hour about our favorite games and types of games. And Shut the Box, that Rachel mentions, is one of my favorite ones as well. That decomposing numbers, we can't do enough of that with kids to help build that number sense. I love Shut the Box of all ages. I hear it's like on the coffee table of families playing it all the time. Apparently it's a bar game. Like, who knew that? Warwick, Rhode Island teaches. If any of you are here, you all taught me that. So I just love it. And then I have a whole Padlet just of games where I do link to some of those, like multi that Rachel mentioned in the book as well. So this is that. So just to let you know that this Padlet is here for you to be able to help explore the resources that Rachel mentions in the book, as well as some more that I have that help support you. All these free resources that are out there for you, but teachers don't know they exist. So I want to be a conduit and connect you to all those. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that to remind you, as well as, the idea that Rachel talks about moving from counting into additive reasoning, and then the young boys were moving into multiplicative reasoning. they were doing like the basic facts, but doing those towers of 2s, doubling to 4s, doubling to 8. That's moving them into that multiplicative reasoning. This is a graphic by Pam Harris. She has a site, Math is Figureoutable. And this is the K-12 journey of our kids. So starting in counting, moving into additive, that's what I'm using, like doubles to help me, or bridging a 10. I'm breaking apart numbers and being flexible. And then multiplicative reasoning is moving beyond the skip counting and going into number relationships, like doubling and doubling to make times 4s, or times 9 is one group less than 10 groups, right? Those are multiplicative reasoning. But too often our kids are getting to 6th and 8th grade and they're in this phase of reasoning, but they're counting one by one some basic facts, or they're skip counting them. Like they're not near that phase of reasoning. So that icon for me helped me in my brain to kind of visualize that connected math journey for the students. So I wanted to mention that.
Can I say something about that?
Absolutely.
I think one misunderstanding, though, that graphic might make us think is that kids move from these stages in a linear fashion, and they somehow emerge one moment like a butterfly into multiplicative thinking, because that's not at all how mathematical development works. Like that kid you're talking about who can do 4 times 5 times 10. And that kid is thinking in a more flexible way about decimals and fractions, and might still be counting to do simple addition. So the sequence of it, I mean, I understand what she's talking about, the research she's drawing from, and I think it's really cool. But one misunderstanding that happens again and again, whenever anybody says like, here's this phase and here's the next phase, just like with Piaget, we as educators overgeneralize that, like, a kid is like, I hear people saying, oh, that kid's a multiplicative thinker. That is not true. Like a kid might think multiplicity on some days, in some ways, in some topics, and not in others. And again, the idea that neurodiverse kids are super complicated, and they often like really struggle with earlier stuff. So I've had kids who can do fractional understanding, and then they still count like by ones when they have a small amount of numbers in front of them. That's probably their processing of like early number is different. So that's just what I want you to remember. I've heard kids called that kid's in an additive. I'm going to have a group of my additive thinkers and a group of my multiplicative thinkers. No, now we've just created, once again, we've used something to create groups where we label kids just because kids are complicated. That's why I love the running records. I love all that stuff. And I love the games. If you think there's a game I don't know about, you really should put it in the chat, because I don't know if you guys saw that part in this chapter where we're like researching math games, but I have over there in my, right there, I have 25 math games. Like, and we're looking at research that have been done on these games, and we're doing research with kids in schools to see what's the effect of Shut the Box. On whom, how does it work, when does it work? And one of the things we're still doing is collecting and assessing games, whether or not we're going to include them. So throw that in there for me.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate you sharing that, Rachel. Absolutely. That was a takeaway for me when you had mentioned that you no longer assume any of these things are going to happen in a specific order. And I am definitely guilty of thinking that there's a progression, and I'm here and I'm going to move you to here. And the fact that our particular neurodiverse students might be having this thinking over here and then thinking over here is just a complex thing. It's not as easy as we want to make it out as linear, as you said, that linear progression.
And it's also like as the constructivist educators, like I'm bringing it back to Piaget for a reason, because Piaget's stages, by the end of his career, he was like, this is ridiculous. Do not believe this. But people still codified them into stages and labeled kids with them. So it is constructivist educators take new ideas and new research. And one of the things that we need to be careful about is to never name kids in ways that we think we know all about their mathematics. And it's not just neurodivergent kids that are like varied in this, like, because I got to college and I did not understand percentages, because I don't know why I did not understand percentages at all. Like, so obviously I got an A in calculus and I could not do percentages. So varied.
Annalise, sorry, Karina's had her hand up for a while.
I appreciate that. I never see the hands up. So Laura, I appreciate you having my back. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Dr. Rachel Lambert, when you saw the chart on page 167 with all the kids' strategies, when the kids notice sometimes that their strategy is not as efficient as another, in my experience, they didn't want to put it out there. So I wanted to know what you experienced with these kiddos, Franco and Jeremy, that you named in this chapter.
What do you mean when I wrote down their strategies?
Right, when on the page at the bottom, you have all of their strategies and it says, you know, just
Yeah.
know it or
Just a second.
tower building. And I'm just wondering, because I know that I've seen in my own experience, when kiddos see one strategy as being less efficient,
Oh,
sometimes as they get a little bit older, I've noticed that they're not as willing to share it, even though it's so important to make that connection. So I was wondering what your experience has been with that.
yeah, definitely. Definitely. The kids try to figure out, they try to suss out like what is good and what is the bad strategy. I mean, I had kids tell me when I was a teacher, like, are you going to make me go first in this share or am I going to get to go last? And I'm like, oh, I see you have figured me out. Like, I'm not so subtle as I thought. So I think we got to mess with that stuff a lot and change the order. And because it just, again, it's like the great ideas that become solidified. Kids are looking for any type of figuring out about their strategies. What's the sequence? And so, and yet we're trying to push them. So how do we like basically deal with that fact that we don't want to, we want to value what they have, and then we want to push them to other strategies. And I find that as we actively make it cool to use different strategies, but then expose them to other people's strategies, it generally happens. But we have to be very, very clear that all strategies are cool. Like, and we show that they're cool by being like, oh, I can't believe you did that. That's cool. But what's tricky as a teacher when you're more like advanced in this area is if you are really tired of this one kid counting by ones to like gather the enthusiasm. And plus you want to push them to like, oh, count by twos. So it is, it's a tension. It's not an easy thing to do, to validate and yet to move forward, or as Kathy Fosner used to say, to support and stretch. You see, I'm kind of talking like her there, support and stretch. So like at the same time, that's two different things you're doing. That's hard to do two different things at the same time. Did I answer your question?
Thank you.
There is a time and a place though that we don't want kids using certain strategies, right? Like in a way to get kids beyond counting by ones is give them big problems, do 32 and one more. I had a kid who was in second grade when I was doing math recovery, and he would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and everything I gave him, and I just kept giving it. He'd been told since in kindergarten, put the big number in your head, right? It didn't make sense to him. Finally, I wore him out, and he was like, ugh. 33, 34, you just count on. So I think it's a strategy as teachers that we can use. And so I think it's more like there's so many different strategies for certain problems that to rank them or say one is more efficient than the other. But I think we can agree, especially when kids hit third grade and beyond, like we should not be counting by ones if you're counting more than 5 things. There's a more efficient way to do it. And my experience has been 3rd, 4th, 5th graders who are counting by ones and writing tick marks on the back of their pages. They hate math because it's so hard for them. And they often make an error, just a simple little error because of counting. So I do think we have to be strategic about that. And like, I don't want to like make a big deal out of a kid's counting by one strategy if it's an inappropriate strategy for that problem.
I totally agree. And what you're saying is manipulation. And I should have added that in my answer because I believe that big problems. And there's some research I cite in the book about kids did not change their strategies until they were given bigger numbers. And I think that's well established. But you can also manipulate them in other ways. If kids are counting by ones in an array, you can give them arrays that are blocked. You can give them, suddenly they don't have the middle of the array, but very purposefully messing with them, pairing them with a kid who has a strategy you think they're going to try, giving very different kinds of manipulatives. Yeah, we can be strategic and basically trick them into trying new strategies. And that is what I advise. Trickery.
I think a big piece of that puzzle for me as well is that we need students to be able to know a variety of strategies so that they can choose them, given the numbers that are given. right? I do different strategies, but it's on different numbers that you give me. And that's part of it too. I think some teachers feel frustrated when their kids are asked to do something and they're showing a variety of ways. It's just, they're just kind of doing day one is this, day two is that, day three is this, and now they should know their facts. And then they're frustrated because the kids aren't doing it and not showing those relationships. Whereas if we were to focus on one and give time for the kids to own them, and then we have another one, now we can have a choice between them and we can give them the opportunity just to choose. So I love this is this is from John San Giovanni and Jenny Bay Williams, another, I think, a phenomenal fluency book, The Figuring Out Fluency. It's a K-8 book. And they talk about having the students be able to know how to use a variety of ones so that they can choose them. And just as an example, giving expressions like this for subtraction, where we're not having that load of them calculating the answer. The goal is just, which ones might you choose? And it's a possibility. There's no right and wrong answers. It's like, are any of these ones that your brain would lead you to just remove the friendly number? So for example, 45 minus an 11. I might take away 10, take away 1, if that, as my choice. But then I can have those same expressions, but change the strategy to be like adding up to find the distance. Are any of them you choose for that? And see if there are different number expressions that the different strategies are more lead you toward, right? If numbers are close together, like 102 minus 98, I don't want to remove the 90, remove the 8. I want to add up to find the distance. It's a choice. And I have to know the meaning of the operation of subtraction that allows me to understand that flexibility and then be able to choose it, and giving chance that kids that opportunity to choose without the burden of calculating where I'm counting one by one, right? I think that's an important piece of the fluency, starting in basic facts, but of course it extends to all the sets of numbers the kids are wrestling with in their journeys. I'm going to get us into our groups talking about the number strings, and I'll get you back out about 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Again, I love it. You're all there. Not one person came back early, so I know there's so much good. I want to capture some of it here, and I think there's some richness also having Rachel here with us tonight. If you have a couple of questions, I mean, we're not going to keep her long, but I did want to mention, make sure we're clarifying and be clear on what the chapter is about in terms of number strings. And I was learning about number talks from the Sherry Parrish's book years ago, but in her book, she has number strings. They're like a series of 4 expressions that are together by a certain relationship. But yet a number talk is like when you have just one expression and then kids solve it in a variety of ways, represent their thinking on the board, and you're sharing a variety of ways, and that's the routine. But number strings are an intentional sequence of expressions. There's no dictate students have to use any one strategy, as Rachel shares. But the structure of that number string lends a certain relationship where more strategies can be more efficient than others. So it's a series of expressions, one at a time, where you're kind of facilitating that discussion. So TJ, do you want to share?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Annalise, I completely disagree with what you just said. I've worked for Math Solutions. I've done number talk trainings, like whole days with thousands of teachers. Number talks are absolutely done with a problem string. There's no number talk in Sherry Parrish's book that is just one expression. The problem is the videos in the book take one section of a number string of like number talk. That's what they use. And so teachers come away with the idea that a number talk is one expression and that you talk about. That is not at all.
I guess I'm guilty. I guess I'm guilty of that. Yes, I thought it was just 100%. One.
So my mind is blown. I thought exactly like Annalise.
The critical piece about a number talk, according to Sherry Parrish, is that it's done mentally. You are not allowing kids to write. They're not using manipulatives. That is for me, and that's what I've adopted as like, when we talk about a number talk, it's using a number string or a problem string that's done mentally, and the teacher records the thinking. Pam Harris wrote problem strings for the Bridges program, and they have the students writing. And I often think that with easier problems, students should be doing those mentally. We shouldn't be encouraging students to write those if they can do something mentally. Mental thinking forces you to think differently than the writing. Sorry, I just had to say that.
No, because
I'm
I'm just
so
trying to
glad
wrap
you
my
did.
head around that. So
I have to
Or-
say something too. I gotta enter the conversation here because I'm a little bit obsessed with this idea of the differences. But not everyone uses number talk in the same way. When Sherry Parrish wrote that book, she changed the definition of number strings from one problem to a string of problem. If you see that term used before she wrote that book, it was always one problem. So Kathy Humphreys's book, Joe Bowler's work, that's all one problem. A number talk is one problem. Okay, so that's in time. And Kathy Richards, is it Kathy Richardson who does that early math strategy? She used that same thing too. Okay, I'm telling you the history of this because I have looked it up. So that, and I've asked these people, all the people, because I was like, why do you all use the same word for, like, it's so confusing. Okay, so then that happens, and then she writes the number strings book, like codifying all these number strings, but they're shorter, definitely shorter than like Kathy Fosno's, because Kathy Fosno's, I mean, I was trained by Kathy Fosno, so no disrespect, but like, there's like 15 problems, and I'm like, you don't even understand. We can't be doing 15 problems, people. Like, it's not a warm up at that point. But so that, and then there's a different, the number strings come from the Dutch. The Dutch people came to Kathy Fosno and Math in the City, and they trained us, and it was called Waves of Problems, which is a Dutch translation of it. So these Dutch people were teaching us like in the 90s, and that's where I learned it. Then Pam Harris came involved with those people, and she's like, number strings is a really confusing word because it means something in computing. She goes, I'm going to change it to problem strings. And she asked us to change it, and we said no. But Heinemann had already asked Kathy Fosno to change the name to mini lessons in her curriculum. So she was like, no, they're mini lessons. And me and all the other Math in the City people were like, no, they're number strings. And then Pam was like, no, they're problem strings. And we're like, and then someone else was like, no, they're number talks. So number talks can be both because they're used both ways by awesome people. But some people use that term for just one problem. And they are still using it. And who wrote the great secondary number talks book? I was looking for it on my, all those are one problem.
It was also Sherry Parrish, but she teamed with someone else, and I don't know the other author.
No, this is not, it's not Sherry Parrish. This is, I love this book on K-12 numbers talks, but they're always one problem.
Is it Ruth
I'm gonna
Parker?
find it for you, TJ.
Yeah.
All right, have I made it more complicated or made it simpler?
I think it's completely complicated, and the teachers I work with around the country are confused about what are you talking about? Math talk, number talks, problem strings, number strings. I think the math community needs to come together and like clarify, come up with some solidified reasons about, because the mental math piece is so critical, I think.
That's right.
And that when that gets lost, like I've done trainings with teachers where I'm very explicit with them. It must be mental math, and you are recording the thinking. I go back a month later, and the kids have dry erase boards. It's like, just they don't have paper pencil doesn't mean they should be using a dry erase board.
So what would you call that's one problem where they can give a variety of?
I call them
a math talk.
A math talk.
Oh, he calls it a math talk. So we would call that a math talk or a number talk. So I wrote a blog post about this at one point. And one time I was at a conference and they were sharing number strings, but there were only one problem. And then somebody, this woman from Stanford who works with Joe Bowler, she was standing up. She's like, she's done research on this. She's like, this is not a number string. Number strings have more than one problem. And then Martin Dolk from the Netherlands stood up. He was in the back of the room sitting next to me. And he was like, no, it's not. And it started a fight. It wasn't a real fight.
Strings are one strategy with
so fun.
With a string of problems, right? Like
well, usually they're one strategy. Usually they're mental math. They're just, it's got to be a sequence and it's got to have a model and it's got to be mental.
Yeah, I always do mental, no whiteboards.
I give some kids, I don't see the purity here because sometimes I give a kid a whiteboard. I have a kid who needs a whiteboard. Yeah, I give him a whiteboard. Sometimes kids need that.
And I was going to, oh, sorry.
Kit, what do you got to say?
Just that I think for students who have working memory issues, which many of our students with disabilities do, they can be doing mental math and literally lose the number that they're trying to hold on to. And so jotting that number down, whether it's on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper, to come back to it when they're then ready to use it in the next part of their mental math can be the difference between them being frustrated and unable to calculate and being able to engage and participate. And so that's why I think Pam and Kathy's like doing mental math means doing it with your head, not necessarily in your head, is the sort of phrase that I go to, because I think that there are a lot of students who the numbers get lost in the brain, but they're still willing to engage with the thinking process.
Oh, so fascinating. I love learning the history of it, Rachel. Thank you for sharing that. It's so true to think back of the originators. I mean, like Ruth Parker and Kathy Richardson.
Ruth Parker, that's the one.
Yeah,
It
Ruth
was
Parker.
Ruth
They did
Parker
decades
that was in the
ago.
room.
Yes.
And everybody
Yes.
was like, Ruth Parker. And yes, and everyone was like,
Yes.
she is like the guru. Like Ruth, a lot of people think Ruth Parker created number talks /
Yes.
number strings,
Yes.
and she is amazing.
Yes.
So it was funny. I mean, I don't want this to be, I don't think it's a problem. I'm always just like, whatever. Well, like, just tell me what you mean by that term and let's move on. Like, because I don't, and I love Karina. I just met you. I love you, but I don't think we should come up with a new name. I think that's the last thing we should be doing. But I respect the enthusiasm.
I don't have any questions about fact fluency, but I really have a question for Rachel. I'm wondering about the K-8. And I just see this as so relevant to high school as well. I'm wondering, like, what was your thought behind K-8? Did you consider a K-12? Like, what were your thoughts about that?
This is a really great question. And when I started writing the book, I was writing it with Andy Gale, who's a high school teacher. 10 years ago, he's a high school teacher. He works in a school with kids for significant kids with significant support needs that I had also worked at. Like, so I was a consultant at the school, and him and I were like really close. And we're like, we need to write a book. And okay, I have to, Kit and TJ, waves of problems was what it translated to. I asked this guy recently because I had to know. So we were going to make a K-12, and then it just didn't work. Like, basically I had to try to get tenure at my job, and it was like busy, and I couldn't do it, and it was too much. And so we couldn't do it we couldn't do it together. Then I didn't do anything on the book for years. And then I got fired up to really write the book. And a year and a half ago, and I got a new publisher, and I was ready to go. And I was like, I'm going to write this. And what I did was I looked for the teachers. The heart of the book for me is the last chapters with the teachers. And what I looked for was, from my research, from just visiting schools, what are the stories that would ground this, the actual teachers' practice? Because I didn't want to make stuff up. You know, people make up stuff for these books, by the way, just FYI. I was told it's fine to make things up. You could change the story, do all this stuff. I might have changed people's outfits, but I didn't really change anything. I mean, I'm just kidding about the outfits. I don't know what I'm talking about. But like I was like, these are the stories, and it's only K-8. So the actual children I am speaking about are K-8. So the book is K-8, if that makes sense, because it really emerges from my research and my visits in classrooms. And the only real experience I have in high school was working at this one high school, but only as a consultant. And so I don't have a deepness or a richness to that. And I told the publisher, like, I just felt like I would be a fraud if I had put K-12 on it. But now I feel bad because people are like, I can't use this, I should use this. So everyone who brings it up to me, I tell them, great, get ready to write your book. Are you ready? Let's get on it. When's your book coming out on high school? Like, because there's so much work to be done in this space. Like, we need a lot of books. We need a lot of work. We need a lot of stuff being done, and everybody here can generate and do work and add to it. And if you want to write a blog post about how it applies to high school, just email me and tell me about it. And then I'm going to get myself situated in the fall and be writing blog posts and stuff. And I would love help with anybody doing that. That was a long answer. Sorry.
And actually, Rachel, and you mentioned you were curious what teachers want to hear more from you about. Like, that's what I've always heard you talk about, how more research begets more research. It's just more questions, right? It's a never-ending journey. And that's why even our discussion tonight about number strings and number talks and problem strings, like, I feel like I live by Dr. Maya Angelou's quote, we do the best we can until we learn more. When you learn more, you do better. And to be open to that constant learning all the time, and to be okay that some aren't right answers and wrong answers, it can leave it more ambiguous. But I love how you're helping all of us. I know I didn't have the words to say back to people who would bring up the things like the science of math, would say, well, research says kids need time things to do better, or research says that that time tests don't cause math anxiety. Like all those myths that are to my core the opposite of what I believe to be true for children. Your book gave me, and your webinar is on the research that you're at that cusp of special ed research and math ed research, has given me the words and the knowledge to have the conversation knowledgeably, and to advocate for every student. And I'm just so grateful that you were able to culminate that in a book that I can hold, that I can have others read as well, to help change this world for our kids and with their math journey. So I want to thank you so much for all that you did with that, and all that you will continue to do moving forward. But I was curious if you had any questions for us.
Yes, like first of all, I think that the book, it resonates with people who they're like, yeah, like you're saying, like I believe this, and people told me that I was wrong, and they have PhDs, and boo them. So like it's like not, in a way, I'm sure it's like not new content. I might give you some new information you might not know about this or that, because I am a true nerd and I like to tell stories about math research and weirdness. But it's about, like, this is a resonant issue because, like, we are neurodiverse, we are disabled, we care about these issues, and it's been silenced, and it's been othered, and it's been like not talked about, and it's been only put in the special ed community. And even as special ed teachers like myself, we've been told that we can't do certain things. It's wrong, it's broken, it's bad, we can't do that because our kids need very certain and specific things. And so it's like a mass move, like teachers want to change this, and they have been changing it. So it's just sort of, little books to support you in doing that, I guess. And the other thing, what I was telling Annalise that I would really like is, I mean, books are relational. So I wrote this book, but then when people started putting like pictures of themselves with Post-it notes in it, I was like crying. And I was like, why am I crying? And I was like, because I didn't really believe anyone would read it. Like, and then they read it, but then they're like, I like this part. You don't understand how that feels to a writer, because I'm like, they like this part. There's a couple places where multiple people have said this quote really means a lot. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even remember that line. I didn't mean that to be good. That is good. I get it. So when I hear what resonates and what questions you have, first of all, that helps me when I'm doing presentations to teachers, which I'm doing a lot of in this upcoming year. Like, what parts are the most like resonating, like what goes, and what questions or expansions do you want? Like, I'm already hearing there's not enough about games in it, especially because my research is about games. People are like, you should write blog posts more about the games and the research you're doing on games, because it's totally not enough in the book. Like, what's not enough, and what should I add and expand? So I'm hearing high school games, more student stories from Karina, my new friend.
Could I also add, I'd love to hear some talks about building thinking classrooms, and like how you would put these together with some of those strategies.
There are 2 chapters about building thinking classroom. Is that not enough for you?
Not enough.
Not enough. All right, good.
TJ has his hand up.
So just 2 quick things. One, Rachel, was last week we were discussing the chapter that had talked about number paths and number lines, or number lines. I would say something I think you could beef up would be that section, just like the like, where do they start? And just, I think so many people have misconceptions about what a number line is and what a number path is. And K1 students with number lines in their hands is not really a great thing unless you're in Texas, where they expect standardized measurement in first grade. So that's one thing I would love to see. I echo everything everyone said about the book. It's amazing. My other question for you is around college professors. How do we stop the wave of new special educators coming out? I am a special educator by trade. I came out with a dual certification, a K-12 consulting teacher and a K-12 reading coordinator. So I had all this great training around teaching reading, I did not have to take one course, and I got a master's degree. I did not have to take one course about teaching math. So I'm a highly skilled professional in a school, and I have no idea how to teach math. So all of my learning about how to teach math well, and I'm still learning at 54, came from learning in the classroom and doing workshops and professional learning. I became a coach. So it's just been this like 20+ year journey at this point. But I don't see that a change. I still interact with new to teaching teachers as well as mostly special educators who have no background in how to teach math. How do we stop this? What can happen at the college and university level?
That is a very good point. Both places I started working in California, Chapman University, and then now UCSB, University of California, Santa Barbara, both did not have math classes for special education departments. And they, one of them had 1 hour of touch math. That's right. That's all they got was 1 hour of touch math. Do you see your faces? I should have taken a picture. You're like, and some people are like, what is that? And other people are like, but I started a class at both places. So now they're taking it, and a lot of states are pushing for it. This is a good policy direction to push in, because this is an actual policy, because then at least we're not making K-12 teachers do things, which we hate doing. Let's just make the university professors do things, because that's funner. Because, right? Yeah, it's much more fun. Make policy directives. But all special educators, there should be, I mean, forget about the science of math. All special educators should have a full course in teaching mathematics if you want to see any change. But there's a reason that they don't do that. That's because, as you know, the idea is that special educators are trained in teaching disability, not teaching content. Like, we are going to become experts in autism, we're going to become experts in dyslexia, learning disabilities, but not content, because it's knowing the kid that's going to fix everything. But then we do know the kids and we understand a lot, but we don't know how to teach math, right? So that's a fixable problem through policy. And it is changing, but it is still, and it's a good place to put energy, I think. I know a lot of places, like I just talked to someone who's making a course at UCLA. A lot of people, and I have a lot of people reading the book, and they want to talk to me about using it in their math methods course. And I designed it actually to use it in my math methods course for special educators at UC Santa Barbara. So I will be.
Rachel, this is Marianne. I wondered about, you have some in here about like Desmos and things, but I think the use of technology as an accessibility and then a thinking piece, I've just had such powerful with students of all and adults of all abilities, being able to model things through technology to understand connections in a representation has been incredibly powerful. And I know you did mention some of that in this book, but I'm just wondering also about some other, some more, just if you were thinking about things, that's something we're going to be working on in my group, both for accessibility for adults and kids, to kind of see how numbers work together, particularly visually, like through Desmos or something like that.
I really like the work of this researcher, Sophia Tancredi. She works, I think she's in Europe now, but she worked with Dora Abramson at UC San Francisco, and their work is on embodiment through technology. So like 3-dimensional, they did work with some autistic children on like stimming and moving and the mathematicality of that movement and shape stuff. I mean, it's really cool stuff. It's not like, I think they actually did just create something maybe called Quad. There is a reason that I don't talk about technology a lot. It's because I love technology personally, but I think technology is overused as a push it at the kids with disabilities. Besides AAC, which every child should have access to communication, I feel very passionately about that. I've just seen too many kids like with IEPs sat in front of a computer and the technology not be interactive. And I know that's nothing to what you're talking about. I know it has beautiful affordances, but I did not want to even have a whole chapter on that. And even when my work with games, we are very specifically, it is non-digital games. I'm not looking at a single digital game. And that's not because I don't think they're amazing and beautiful. It's because you guys know why. I would rather that teacher play a board game with the kid or a card game with that kid. But an experienced teacher should be using all of those for the affordances that they have. In the study I did recently, we were interviewing kids and they did Desmos. They did Desmos in 3 different classrooms. And it was used so differently in those different classrooms. And I don't know if I'll tell Desmos this because I don't want to upset them because they're like so cool. But some of the teachers, it was really oppressive the way it was used for kids. Like it was, there was, you know, that the chart that shows how good you are, like how far you are in the lessons, that was up 100% of the time on the big board. They weren't allowed to talk to each other. So the students that I interviewed who are all Latinas with learning disabilities were like, you know, that did not work with them. Then the next year they go to another teacher. This teacher is unbelievable. The way they engage and they talk and they liked, I mean, it was transformative because it was used incredibly differently. So I think that that's really important, but I guess I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. I have conflicting feelings.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining in tonight. This has been a phenomenal chat. Having you, Rachel, here has been such a privilege and a treat. I do want to let you all know that Rachel has a website on number strings, and I put it on the Padlet at the top of the column of the Chapter 11 column. So check out her website. There's a video of her. She mentioned in the book of doing a division number string, but there's lots of other resources. It's Kara M, Rachel, I believe. Is
Kara M.
Kara
Dr.
M.
Kara M.
Kara M. And I do want to
don't say it with an accent. And I'm just saying that way. Dr. Kara M.
Kara M. If any of you happen to live near New England, this fall, the New England Math Conference of Teachers, I am the program chair of our conference this year, and Rachel is coming as one of our keynote speakers. So if you can make it to Nashua, New Hampshire, it's October 25th and 26th. Not only will Rachel be a keynote, which means that everyone gets to listen to her. There's no breakout sessions that I'm planning at the same time. But there's also another slew of wonderful keynote and featured speakers and many people that are here tonight, like Kit and TJ and Sue Looney was here. They're presenting as well. So it's just going to be a wonderful 2-day experience of Math Conference. I forget if anyone else is here that is also presenting. I apologize. But it's going to be a phenomenal couple of days of math learning. So I welcome you to join in and join us in Nashua, New Hampshire. Just check out the chat bar. Rachel just put her email in there for you. So appreciative of all of you joining in tonight and sharing, of course, your thoughts, and just such a privilege for me to be a part of that journey, joining in along with you all. Next, we are meeting again August 7th. We're going to be reading about chapters 12 and 13. So I wish you all a wonderful couple of weeks or another week and a half. I don't know. August is coming up really fast. I guess it's just this Thursday, isn't it? Yeah, week and a half. All right, everyone. Have a great night. Take care.